So, let me take you back to September 2023. So it's just over a year ago. It's late on a Monday, and I'm supposed to already have stopped with work for that day, when I noticed that someone from HR has put a meeting in with me first thing for the next day for only 10 minutes. Yeah, I knew at that moment I was going to be made redundant. Now, instead of panicking or getting upset, I remained calm and collected. I knew that I'd be okay, that I could deal with whatever came my way. So throughout my career, I've gone through various ups and downs. I've had multiple startups that failed and had to fold. I've worked at companies that have gone through strategy changes or restructuring. And as a manager, I've had to support some of my direct reports through some pretty rough times. I've had to deal with tough times at work while also dealing with illness and grief and burnout. In my case, luckily not all at the same time, but still a tough thing to do. And this was all while hearing news report after news report that the world isn't as nice as a place as I wished it was. And I know I'm not alone in this. We all go through these moments of turbulence, because that's just what life is. And I got a comment from a colleague once. Melinda, you're always so calm, no matter what changes are happening around us. How do you stay so unflappable? And it really got me thinking about resilience. What was it that helped me through the things that I have been through? How do we react to what life kind of throws our way? Now, I've always been fascinated by how our brains work, and especially how emotions work. So my computer science degree thesis was about emotion recognition. So developing an AI system that could classify facial expressions. At the time, I was focused on how computers could understand emotions. But much of what I learned could also be applied to humans. And I remained fascinated by the psychology of emotions and how to apply that to the engineering teams that I've worked with. So for those of you who don't know me, as James introduced me, I'm Melinda, and last year, after being made redundant, I started my own company where I work with engineers to help them improve their communication and leadership skills. So I used to be a Ruby on Rails engineer and an engineering manager at companies like FutureLearn and the Wikimedia Foundation. And part of my role has been to design our internal engineering cultures, how to help grow the people that I work with and help create environments where people can thrive. So understanding how emotions work and how to manage them has been key in leadership and in life. And now more than ever, resilience is something that we need to talk about, especially with the current state of the tech industry. Redundancies, layoffs, burnout, stress, these are things that are happening constantly around us, to our colleagues, to our friends, to us individually. And these challenges aren't going to go away. The only way to navigate them is by understanding how we can be resilient to handle stress, uncertainty, and setbacks. And that's basically what I want to be talking to you about today. So I'm not going to be talking about anything Ruby related or even really tech related, but I think this is about how we can look at resilience for ourselves. Now, one thing I want to highlight here, though, is I'm not talking here today as someone who has figured this all out. I'm not perfect. I'm not the #1 expert on resilience. In fact, the past 2 weeks have been actually extremely stressful for me. So 2 weeks ago, my cat Dusty got sick, and I had no idea what was happening with him. I had lots of vet visits, sleepless nights, and worrying. I was feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, and unsure of what to do next. I hadn't actually finished writing this talk yet, and it kind of felt ironic to me that here I was preparing a talk about resilience, and I was not feeling resilient at all in those moments. But I'm sharing this to show that even though I feel like I'm pretty resilient when it comes to some cases, especially when it's work-related, I feel like there are other areas where I still need to learn to be more resilient. And preparing this talk actually helped me understand what things I did in other situations that I could apply in this case for myself. So yeah, I'm not standing here in front of you as someone who is resilient all the time, who has all the answers. We're learning all the time, constantly. And that's okay. I'm resilient enough to admit that there are times when I am not okay. And I want to share some techniques and methods with you today that have helped me and that I hope are going to be useful for you too. So all right, let's start by answering a simple question. What exactly is resilience? So here's a definition that I like. Resilience is the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties. It also means the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, which I think applies to people as well. So for me, resilience is the ability to adapt and bounce back when things don't go as planned. It's about how we respond when we're thrown into challenging situations, like being made redundant or recovering from a failed project. But the truth is, resilience isn't just about being tough. It's not about putting on a brave face and pretending that everything's okay. It's not about never struggling. Resilience is about how you handle those curveballs. It's about actually being able to withstand and recover and deal with it. So resilience is all about our internal responses to the world around us. Having resilience means that you're able to process and deal with the challenging things going on around you. And this is about both your thoughts and your feelings. Because often we end up operating on autopilot, react to situations without really being aware of how or why we're responding a certain way. Or we try to suppress the emotions because they're getting in the way. When we develop resilience, it means we're in the driver's seat and we have a more robust way of dealing with what is actually going on. And when you don't develop resilience, it means that you don't know how to process those thoughts and feelings that are going on inside you. And the effects of that can range from being kind of inconvenient to pretty bad. So you can feel less productive. Maybe you're disengaged. Maybe you feel frustrated or angry. Or you can get stressed and burnt out. And that in turn can lead to actual physical health problems. When we're not resilient, we let the challenges get to us mentally, emotionally, and physically. So resilience is a skill that we need to develop to understand what emotions and thoughts are going through us when we have to deal with something challenging. And it can be a bit overwhelming to start developing these skills because there's a ton of research and ideas out there about resilience. And it's a topic that I could literally talk hours for about, but I only got 30 minutes. So instead, I'm going to share what has been most helpful for me. So these are some of the books that really helped shape my understanding of resilience. And I'll touch on ideas from these books today. They all help me come to understand resilience more. They each highlight how understanding how you think and reason about your emotions is key to resilience. And it can be best described by the phrase emotional agility. It's all about being more aware of your emotions, to learn to accept them, and to be intentional with how you deal with them. Understanding how to be more emotionally agile helps you to be more resilient. So I'm going to be talking about 3 things today. First, we'll look at reframing some resilience myths to get you into that right mindset about how to think about resilience. Then we'll look at how to develop emotional agility. And then finally, we'll look at cultivating your resilience. So first, let's take a look at some of those common myths we have about resilience, because these can get in the way of us learning how to change. So first myth, resilience is not a fixed trait. Come on, clicker. There we go. So you don't get born with a certain amount of resilience, and that's it. Resilience is something you can develop and learn to deploy over time, rather than it being an inherent quality that we're all born with. Every one of you here can learn to be more resilient. You're all able to change and adapt. Resilience is like any other skill. It's something we can learn, practice, and improve. Which brings us to the second myth. Resilience is not built up. Now, often when people talk about building resilience, it's implied that over time, you build up this pool of resilience, that if you've gone through enough, you have gathered enough resilience around you. Now, the eagle-eyed among you might notice that I changed the title of this talk, actually, from building resilience to developing resilience, and it's because of that reason. So here's an analogy that I like to use. Resilience is not a brick wall that we're slowly building up brick by brick. It's not something that takes years to build, and then we have this super wall permanently in place, and nothing can get to us. Instead, I think of it like an umbrella. You don't always know how to open your umbrella, and you may not always need it in every situation. But over time, you get better at using it when you need it the most. And initially, you might only know how to use that umbrella in the rain, but you don't know how to deal with snow or with thunderstorms. So you might be incredibly resilient in one situation, say you've learned to navigate difficult feedback, but then completely thrown off when faced with something new, like a personal setback, like me with my cat recently. And that's okay. The key is to take what you've learned from one challenge and then apply it to new ones. But this only works if you take the time to break down those past experiences and understand what was really going on. Experience alone isn't enough. It's how we reflect on and learn from those experiences that helps you develop resilience. So myth number 3, engineers don't need to care about emotions. So let's debunk a myth that I think many of us in tech carry around. The idea that we're supposed to be purely logical and analytical. So there's this default assumption that engineers don't need to care about feelings, that we aren't good at understanding emotions. And that's perpetuated by concepts like personality tests, where you're either thinking or feeling. I remember getting so confused about this question because it didn't make sense to me. I think a lot about my feelings, and I feel a lot about my thoughts. So how are these actually opposites of each other? And yet this stereotype also gets encouraged within the media. Think about Spock from Star Trek, or the characters from The Big Bang Theory, or countless other shows where there's this stereotype that the characters are super logical and analytical, and therefore aren't good at emotions. And so growing up, this had a massive effect on me. I wanted to be seen as someone who was logical and technical, and I thought that meant I should just dismiss my emotions and not take time to understand them. I thought it was this kind of black and white situation. And that's wrong. That's not how our brains actually work. Logic and emotion don't compete in our brains. And we're doing a disservice to ourselves by not taking the time to understand our emotions. In fact, emotions feed into our thoughts, into our decisions, and into our actions. So denying them or pretending that we don't need to deal with them, that just doesn't work. It's like trying to debug code while without reading the error messages. It only makes the problem actually worse. So our emotions are a key part of our decision making. We associate negative and positive feelings to memories of how we make decisions. So there was actually some research done over a decade ago that looked at patients with brain damage who weren't able to understand emotions anymore. And they actually made worse decisions. We need emotions to be logical. And emotions affect everything that we do. They influence how we respond to feedback, how we solve problems, how we manage teams. But the good news is that once we learn to recognize and name our emotions, we can start to manage them. And this leads to better decision-making and better resilience. So myth number 4, resilience only applies to big challenges. Now, we often think of resilience in terms of those big, scary moments. Things like job loss or major life changes or, bad decisions. What really builds resilience, though, is our ability to handle the small, everyday challenges. Because small wins, they matter. They build our confidence and reinforce the belief that we can handle whatever comes next. Every time you overcome a small challenge, you're preparing yourself for bigger ones. So the techniques that I'm talking about today, don't wait until something big comes along to put these skills into practice. Try this out as soon as you can. So we've looked at some resilience myths. Next, let's look at developing emotional agility. So what is emotional agility? Now, the first time I came across the phrase was in the book Emotional Agility from Susan David. Even though it's a principle that I feel lots of books have actually described over the years, this was the first time I heard this phrase that kind of really encapsulated it all. And here's how David defines it. Emotional agility means being aware and accepting of all your emotions, even learning from the most difficult ones. So this ties back to what we said earlier about resilience. If we want to deal with turbulence and challenging times in a healthy way, in a way that we can bounce back, it means that we need to be able to understand what's going on in us. So we need to be able to look at ourselves and have this awareness of what emotions are actually happening. So the essence of emotional agility can be summed up by this quote by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So when we're emotionally agile and something happens, when there's this stimulus, we create breathing space to figure out what we want our response to be, rather than defaulting to that autopilot behavior. So I'm going to take a look at this process in a bit more detail, looking at the steps that we need to take to respond in a more resilient way. So step 1, understand your default behaviors. So when something stressful happens, we all have default ways of reacting. So I'll have a look at what some of the most common ones are. So the first is bottling emotions up. So this is about putting your emotions to the side and trying to get on with things. In this case, you're ignoring, minimizing, or suppressing your emotions. It might mean that you try to distract yourself with doing something else, or you brush away the feeling that you're experiencing, or you tell yourself that you shouldn't feel like this. So bottling means pretending that the emotions don't exist. Then we have ruminating and brooding. And that's almost the opposite of bottling. You're basically fully into the emotion, but you're obsessing over the past and specific details. So remember what Ollie said this morning about overthinking? This is overthinking to the extreme. So you're going over all the things that you could say or do, or the things that you could have done differently. You obsess about a certain aspect of the challenging situation. Let's say you cause a bug with some major downtime. If you're ruminating, you might go over what you shipped, what you might have missed, why you didn't see the mistake you made. With brooding, you circle and circle and circle back over the same things over and over again. Then there's forcing false positivity. So this is pretending to be happier than you actually are, or pushing yourself to feel more happy. Again, this is a variation of ignoring your negative emotions, but you're chasing the positivity. Now, some form of staying positive is good, but this, again, is when it's taken to the extreme, when you're only focusing on the good and ignoring the useful warning signs of your negative emotions. And then there's 4, that's healthy emotional processing, where we deal with the actual emotions. And that's what we were looking at for the next few steps. So I'm not going into too much detail here yet. But think about this and the other responses. Take a moment to reflect. What's your default behavior? How do you usually respond to stress or setbacks? Do you bottle up? Do you brood? Do you force positivity? So I know for myself that I brood, I overthink, I worry and ruminate about all the things that I should have done differently. Recognizing your go-to behavior is the first step to building healthier emotional habits, because it means that you can stop falling into that trap of going on autopilot. Step 2 is recognize your emotions. So you can't manage what you don't notice. Awareness of emotions is key to resilience. So this is about stepping into what you're feeling and then getting curious about it. It's about self-awareness, really understanding what's going on in your emotional world. So cultivate the self-awareness of the emotion. What exactly are you experiencing? What are the nuances? And sometimes you might not have the words to describe it. It can take time to put into words what you're feeling. Now let's say you're feeling stressed about something at work. That term stressed is actually very broad. Can you narrow it down? So is it frustration? Is it exhaustion? Is it anger? You need to pinpoint exactly what the emotion is. And if you need some help with labeling the emotion, there are resources out there that can help. For starters, Google the phrase emotions wheel, and you can find various diagrams out there categorizing different types of emotions. Or look at Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, which describes 87 different types of emotions that we have. So this is about learning how to label what you're experiencing. And then ask yourself, what is the purpose of this emotion? What is this emotion trying to tell me? Because every emotion, even negative ones, have a purpose. They're signals, warning signs that something needs attention. Anger might be telling you that a boundary has been crossed. Anxiety might be pointing out that there's uncertainty or a risk that you're not addressing. And we often feel like we need to avoid and dislike negative emotions, but they are there for a reason. So the goal here isn't to avoid these emotions, but to recognize and make sense of them. Once you understand them, you can choose how to respond instead of letting the emotion drive your actions. For instance, when I was overwhelmed with my cat Dusty 2 weeks ago, I realized that there were a lot of emotions happening within me. I was feeling scared because I didn't know what was happening to him. I was feeling guilty because I wasn't sure if maybe I had done something wrong that caused it, or maybe there was something more that I should be doing. I was feeling sad because I wasn't sure whether this was maybe the moment that I had to say goodbye. To become more resilient, you need to acknowledge what emotions are happening with you so that you can understand what they're trying to warn you about, and so that you can come up with reactions, actions, and responses that help you deal with that emotion. And step 3 is decouple you from the emotion. So it's easy to get wrapped up in our emotions and then let them define us. If we say things like, I am anxious or I am angry, as if so we often say things like, I am anxious or I am angry, like those feelings are permanent. But what if we started to observe our emotions instead of letting them define us? So we need to create space between ourselves and the emotion that we're experiencing. So observe yourself having those feelings. And one way of doing this is through mindfulness. Now, I know mindfulness feels like it's become a bit of a buzzword, and it has, but it's the best way to describe what I mean here. And I want to make that point by thinking about mindlessness versus mindfulness. So with mindlessness, we're reacting in the moment. We're quick to judge, quick to respond, quick to overreact. We basically let our lizard brain make the decisions for us. And mindfulness, on the other hand, means noticing your thoughts and emotions without letting them control you. It's like being the observer in your own mind, watching your emotions pass by without attaching your identity to them. So instead of saying, I am angry or I am embarrassed, frame it as, I am feeling angry. Realize the emotion that is separate from you. And this creates space between you and your reaction. allowing you to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. So this is what I mean when I say it's better to be responsive rather than reactive. And finally, step 4 is manage your response. So once you've recognized and separated yourself from the emotion, the next step is deciding what to do with it. And this is where emotional self-management comes into play. So there are 2 parts of this. First, it's about how you want to deal with the emotion internally. What is the best way to address the emotion? If you're feeling scared or guilty, why is that? How can you deal with it? What do you need to do to help yourself? So rather than staying stuck in the emotion and like doom thinking, you're using the purpose of the emotion to recognize what you need and then turn it into tangible next steps. Once you've dealt with the internal part, emotional self-management is also about deciding what we display externally. What messages are we sending by the way that we react? Now, let's say you're in a work meeting and you hear some bad news, like your team is being disbanded. You recognize that you're frustrated, but rather than immediately show that frustration on your face, you choose to stay calm. So choosing what you show doesn't mean that you're ignoring or suppressing your feelings. It's about consciously deciding how you present yourself in a way that keeps the situation productive. And sometimes managing our emotions is less about deciding what to display and more about knowing when to step away, when to pause, and when to recharge. When you're caught up in the heat of emotions, it's easy to think that you have to solve everything right there and then. But the reality is, things often become clearer when we give ourselves time and space to pause. Knowing when to take that step back is a critical part of building that agility. And finally, building resilience doesn't mean doing it all alone. Sometimes the best way to manage your emotions is by talking to others, taking the time to get advice from other people. So finally, I wanted to talk about a few values to embrace to cultivate your resilience even more. So one of the hardest but most important lessons that I've learned about resilience is to embrace uncertainty. We often look for control, for predictability. But life and work, especially within tech, is full of change and ambiguity. It's in these moments of uncertainty that our resilience is really tested. Because change is inevitable. No matter how much we plan, unexpected situations will always come up. So instead of fearing uncertainty, we can begin to view it as a constant part of our journey. It's an opportunity for growth and not something to be avoided. And one way of embracing uncertainty is focusing on what is actually within our control. So you can't predict the future, but you can control your responses. So ask yourself, what's in my control right now? By focusing on our actions, our mindset, and choices, we shift from feeling helpless to feeling empowered. Now, the second value is to adopt a growth mindset. So a belief that our abilities, including resilience, can be developed. And this is key because it frames challenges not as setbacks, but as opportunities for learning. It's the opposite, in the opposite of a growth mindset, a fixed mindset, challenges are seen as threats. A failure kind of feels final. But in a growth mindset, challenges are seen as chances to learn. Mistakes are simply stepping stones towards improving. So by embracing a growth mindset, you allow yourself to grow from the very challenges that otherwise would stop you. And the value 3 is understand what you care about. This is about knowing who you are and why you do things. It means that you spend your energy and your time on the things that truly matter to you. So why do you do what you do? What are your goals and your dreams? Knowing this means that when challenging times comes your way, you can focus and prioritize what's actually important to you. And then finally, and perhaps the most important, is we need to encourage self-compassion. In times of stress or failure, our inner voices can actually be the harshest critics. Resilience isn't about pushing through without feeling. It's about treating ourselves with kindness in the face of tough times. And we're often kinder to others than we are to ourselves. So self-compassion is key to resilience. When we acknowledge that our struggles when we acknowledge our struggles without judgment and treat ourselves with that same empathy that we'd show a friend or a colleague, we build emotional strength. So those are my lessons for you today about resilience. We talked about myths to debunk, steps to build your emotional agility, and values to apply to yourself. Of course, now the clicker stops working. There we go. So if I could share one final thing from my own experience, it's that I didn't always think of myself as someone who could be resilient. Over time, I realized that other people weren't just naturally more resilient. They had learned to manage their responses, just like we've talked about today. Resilience isn't a one-time thing. It's not about bouncing back once and then being done with it. It's something that you develop over time through repeated practice. Every setback, every difficult moment, every minor frustration is another chance to strengthen that resilience muscle. And emotional agility is one of the most powerful ways that you can use along the way. So I want to leave you with this. Resilience isn't just for the toughest or the most confident of people. It's for all of us. And the beauty of it is that you can start building it right now. You don't have to wait for the next big challenge to arrive. So as you leave today, think about how you can apply these lessons in your own life. Start with the small moments when things don't go your way, when you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, and use those as opportunities to practice these skills. Because you have the power to develop your own resilience one step at a time. So if you want to find out more about what I do, my one-on-one coaching or training workshops, check out my website, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, of all places, because Twitter doesn't exist anymore, through the QR code there. So thank you all for listening.